Everybody, we're running a little behind. I apologize if anybody's on YouTube. Colossians 2. Finishing up where we left off last week, and then we're going to carry on. So just a reminder, what we are learning, or supposed to be learning, is how to serve. We're kind of focused on that on Sundays and on Wednesdays. And so on Wednesdays, the way we've termed it is suffering, but in a positive way, right? So striving for Christ, not suffering to suffer, which we'll hit on a little bit on that tonight. Yeah, we're starting in 2:20. So last week we were talking about kind of the rules that people set for you that aren't biblical rules, and they have a grand effect on how we approach a life of service. And I think it has a huge negative effect. So there's all of these things that supposedly, you as a Christian, you can't do. And then there's this other part, which we covered on Wednesday very heavily, which is this idea that the more you physically or emotionally suffer for Christ, the better job you're doing of being a Christian. And that is an absolute lie. And we talked a little bit, I think we talked about fasting, church fasting, right? And how when the whole church fasts, the majority of the people fasting are fasting for the attention of fasting, whether they're doing it intentionally or not. That is what ends up happening. And so, you have people complaining about how hungry they are, how tired they are, how sick they feel, how worn out they feel because they're fasting. Huh? Yeah, it becomes all about you. And so that turns into like a kind of idol worship where you actually end up worshiping yourself. Well, the other part of this, which I don't think in our area, in the South, this is not really an issue. It's more like Eastern Orthodox or Catholic, some of the older, more, I guess, traditional religious groups out of Christianity. And it's the idea of like self-affliction. So like you give something up that Christ never asked you to give up in service to Christ to bring you closer to God. And what that actually ends up doing is causing you to end up worshiping your flesh because you get pleasure out of giving stuff up even though God hasn't asked you to. And so it boils down to this idea that you're not doing the will of God, you're doing the will of man. And so you think, we've talked about, I've been, pastor here for 10 years, and we talk all the time about the rules in church that aren't actual real rules, that don't really exist in real life. The biggest one for me is that the pastor is more important than anybody in the congregation. Or for some churches, they have deacons or laypersons, and they treat them like they're special. And they're not. That's a man-written rule. Confessing to a priest is a man-written rule. You don't confess to you don't confess to another man, you confess to God directly. The Bible specifically states that. There is nobody that comes in between you and Jesus. And so all of these man-made rules, they ruin the relationship with Christ. And what that in turn ends up doing is you end up suffering for things that God doesn't want you suffering for, instead of suffering in a good way for God, instead of giving things up for God because he's asking you to, right? Or doing things for God because he's asking you to. So that's kind of where we're jumping right in the middle of it here in 20. If you're watching online and you're confused, just go back and watch last week. It says, if you have died with Christ to the elementary principles of the world, why, as if you were living in the world, do you submit yourselves to decrees? So you have been, if you believe in Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you've been reborn. If you've been reborn, you're given a new identity. If you're given a new identity, that identity has nothing to do with the world. It has to do with the eternal, right? So it has to do with God's realm, not the earthly realm. Well, if you've gone through that process with Christ, then why would you ever allow yourself back into the worldly realm? Why would you ever let anybody other than Jesus control you? Why would you ever let anybody other than Jesus give you rules to follow or things to give up? You shouldn't. And so it goes on, it says, submit yourself to decrees such as do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. And so, there's a bunch of them. And some of them are bizarre to me. So let's just be frank and talk about it. In the South, alcohol is forbidden. In the Bible, that does not exist. Being drunk is forbidden. That's in the Bible. In the South, dipping is okay. Right? So being addicted to tobacco is completely acceptable. But it's harming your body. So the rules can go one way or the other, right? You can't have a beer, but you can have Copenhagen. And if you stop and think about it, none of that makes any sense. And I'm using two that I know for sure in our area that exist, right? There's plenty of others. It's not okay for you to be greedy with your money, but every Sunday you can go and stuff your face at the buffet. Your pastor can weigh, 400 pounds. It's okay. But it's not, because biblically speaking, that's not okay. Right? I'm not talking about, medical conditions, all these exceptions. I'm just talking about as a general rule. It's perfectly acceptable for us in church to completely overeat and be totally overweight. Everybody's fine with that. But it's not okay for somebody to come to church in shorts and flip-flops. Well, why? So these are the things that you have to be careful of in your own life. And I say this every time we talk about this stuff. Don't use this to judge other people. Only use it to judge yourself. And so what ends up happening is you submit to these rules, and in submitting to these rules, however serious or minor they may be, because you've submitted to these rules, you're no longer submitting yourself to God. And if you're not submitting yourself to God, then you're not suffering for Him. You're not striving for Him. You're not doing things for Him. And if you're not doing things for Him, then you're not serving Him. That becomes a problem, doesn't it? And so what we do is we bring people up in church from a very early age. There's nothing wrong with discipline, but I remember when I was young and I went to church, I hated church because I had to be quiet. And I was a boy. And generally speaking, boys don't like to sit still. We don't like to be quiet. We don't like to take showers. We don't like to wear clean clothes. We don't want to sit on a wooden bench for an hour and listen to some old man go on and on, right? But that's what we do. So instead of creating an environment where we're fostering what like children need, which I think is one of the most important aspects of church, we force them into the rules that we think they should follow. And so we're losing our children. Children are not interested in going to church, right? And a child is never going to be interested in coming to church because of something that came out of the Bible. They're going to be interested in coming to church for candy, right, Paul? Or for playing outside. And in the midst of those, you mix Bible in, and you find out, goodness, it sticks. They do actually listen. So, and then then you look at your own life. So, a lot of people, especially around here, they go to church because that's where their parents went, and that's where their grandparents went, and they go and they don't get anything out of it, but they won't leave because they're following the man-made law of this is where my family has always gone to church, therefore this is where I go to church. God is calling them to somewhere different, but they won't go because they're following these rules. So you see you can come at this from 100 different angles. I'm not trying to give you too many examples, but I'm trying to take it just out of the realm of things that are forbidden into things that we do thinking we're being proactive, but we're actually not. Verse 22 says, which all refer to things destined to perish with use. So this is in parentheses, which means it's not considered original part of the manuscript. It is there for clarification. So if you think about all of the things that supposedly are forbidden, right? So you go back to Old Testament rules because that's really what they're talking about here. So what is, let's pick something stupid. Pork, bacon. Everybody like bacon? Everybody loves bacon, right? If anybody doesn't like bacon, they're not a person. Bacon is amazing. Bacon comes from a pig. Pigs are unclean. Old Testament rules say you can't eat a pig. Where is bacon? This is a loaded question. Where is bacon in the afterlife? I'm hoping it's there, but where is Jesus' focus on bacon? He never talks about us getting to heaven and getting a BLT, right? Or two, nice crispy strips with a side of eggs. That's not in here. Why? Because that's not going to exist. It perishes with use, meaning there's no eternality to it. It's not forever. So if it's not forever, it really has no bearing on the kingdom. So therefore, God does not. He doesn't care about it. Right? So you think of all the things in life that, here I am every Wednesday with a bottle of Coke, right? my one a week. And I went running this morning. This stuff was invented by God. I'm convinced of it, right? We talked about this last week. It's delicious. Is it good for you? No. Should you drink it all the time? No. Is it okay to have one every once in a while? Yeah. Should you eat like 4 helpings of bacon every day? No. Especially if you're not working outside like we used to do in the old days, right? If you're going to sit at an office job, you probably shouldn't have bacon every day. You should probably have it once or twice a week. But just because you eat bacon doesn't mean you're like ruining your temple or doing something against God, because he does not care about that. Now, there is some intrinsic value in being tempered, right? So on Saturday you mow the lawn, you have a beer. You play golf, you have a beer. You don't have 8, you have 1, right? That's tempered. You go to have a brownie after dinner. You don't eat the whole pan. You have 1 brownie. Giving money to church. You don't give all of your money to church. You pay your bills, your responsibilities. You keep your family fed, right? But you choose to give a portion of it. We would never accept the idea that, okay, everybody has to give 99% of your income to the church and rely on God. Y'all would throw your arms up like, what, are you crazy? Because that's not biblical. So then it gets down to things that people really don't like to talk about, which is you being here is absolutely not the most important part of your faith life. Absolutely is not. Is it an important part? Yes. Should you be here as often as you can? Yes. Are there times when you can be of service to the kingdom of God more by not being here than by being here? Yes. And until people start to understand that, our faith is completely broken. So we focus on all of these things that won't be in the afterlife instead of focusing on what is in the afterlife, and that is our relationship with God and our spirit. So outside of the parentheses, in verse 22, it says, in accordance with the commandments and teachings of men, right? So that's a question. So what it's saying here is, which one are you following? Are you following what God has asked you to do? And if you remember, he gave us 10 rules. And then because we had a hard time with the 10, he chalked it down to 2. Right? We have 2 rules to follow. They are love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and love each other like Jesus loves you. That's it. So as long as you don't break those 2 rules, there's nothing you're doing wrong in the eyes of Jesus. Now, the moment you break one of those rules, that is called sin. Right? I don't need to get into specifics of that. I'm sure you all understand that quite clearly. But that really is all it boils down to. So if I can be of service in some way, shape, or form by not being here on Sunday, then I should not be here on Sunday. Now, I'm not talking about me in particular. I have a role here, obviously. But there are people that literally won't serve God because they don't want to miss church. Well, that's absolutely stupid. It's completely unfounded. So what are we following? Are in your life, when it comes to suffering, when it comes to striving, when it comes to serving, they're all the same word. In your life, who are you following? Are you following the commandments of men, or are you following the commandments of God? I'll give you one more example of this. So, as a church early on, we used to hold Thanksgiving dinner on Thanksgiving Day for the community. Anybody could come up. You get a little, tray that folded over, closed, or whatever, and it had all the stuff in it. Stuffing, the nasty cranberry jelly, turkey, gravy, green beans, whatever. It was all in there. It was a whole entire meal shoved in this box. And we decided to do it on Thanksgiving Day because if I'm having Thanksgiving dinner and you can't afford Thanksgiving dinner, then you should have Thanksgiving dinner too. So we decided as a church to do it on Thanksgiving Day. I cannot tell you the amount of support I had of people that showed up to volunteer, and I can also not tell you the amount of people that were mad because they had to give up Thanksgiving Day to come serve the less fortunate. Now, I don't have a qualm either way. If you don't want to give up if you don't feel called to give up Thanksgiving Day and serve the less fortunate, then please don't come. But don't come and complain about it the whole time you're there. And even, I remember even my family kind of had a hard time with it. Like, you're doing what? On Thanksgiving Day? Well, yeah, that's what I was called to do. I'm not stopping you from doing anything. I'll be around later, right? We're not serving all day. It's okay. So that's the last example I'll give you. So I want you to get a complete covered idea of where all of these rules seep into, right? So we have the big ones that nobody likes to talk about. Alcohol. Nobody in church likes to talk about alcohol. Okay? You have an example I've given you. Now we have even down to the littlest thing, which is, well, I got to be at church on Sunday because I'm a good church goer. Well, no, you don't. No, you could probably serve, if you're called and you're ignoring that calling, that is a huge problem. So we don't want to follow the commandments of men. We don't want to follow the rules of man. We want to follow the rules of God. So in verse 23, it says, these are matters which have to be sure the appearance of wisdom in self-made religion and self-abasement and severe treatment of the body, but are no value against fleshly indulgence. So here it's talking about this idea that you suffering for suffering's sake is actually you just worshiping yourself. And the more you worship yourself, the more pleasure you get out of worshiping yourself. So it's this vicious cycle. So like you say, I'm going to fast. I'm not going to eat for a week. And you go through that week, and you get through the hunger pains and the whatever, and you get to the mode where you're coasting, because your body will do that. After about 3 or 4 days, your body will just kind of start to slow down, and you can actually go for a really long time without eating. And you go through the process, and you remember how much you suffered, and you get attracted to that suffering, and so you do it again and again and again. But what you end up doing is you're worshiping the idea of fasting instead of listening to God saying, hey, I just wanted you to fast for like a day or maybe a week and focus on me. But here you are, you're fasting and you're focusing on yourself. And so we totally lose this perspective. And it's actually very common, and it comes in so many forms. A lot of people, they get involved in church. Like, you're given a position of authority. Whatever, so stupid. People will get hung up on that. Like, oh, I'm the so-and-so of church. I hold the keys to all the doors. If you want to get in, you've got to ask me. That's dumb. Who's church belong to? God. It's not your building. Never is, never will be. And it won't be left standing when he comes, so obviously he's not that concerned about it. So you shouldn't be either. So the art, and there is an art to it, so the art of serving actually becomes quite difficult. And we don't teach, as pastors, as Bible study people, we don't teach the church how to do it anymore. We don't teach anybody how to serve. Nobody has any idea how to serve. If I were to say to you, let's just play a little game real quick. So I were to say to you, hey, on Saturday we're going to serve. Give me your guesses of what we're doing. Food, okay. Work, we're doing oh gosh, we're going to work on the other side of the building, or clean up out on the street because it looks like homeless people should live here, right? Whatever. See, there it is. It's that simple. It's just giving up your time. There's no activity to it. It's you suffering. It's you surrendering. It's you striving. You saying, look, my Saturdays are precious. I only get one a week. And, it's about to be the end of lawn mowing season, so my Saturdays are about to be wide open. They are precious to me. I am not coming up to the church and blowing 4 hours on doing some dumb project that nobody's going to appreciate. There'll only be 3 of us there, right? The whole negative attitude. You'll know it because you've experienced it, because you felt it yourself. Because the problem is you are answering to something that you are not called to answer to. It's mind-blowing when you're set free. When you realize that you can say no, all of a sudden the entire attitude in church changes. Because the people that want to be there want to be there. There are times where I don't show up to stuff that this church has. There's a reason for that. Because I don't want to be there. Not because I don't want to be there and I'm stubborn, but I'm not called to be there. So there's days where we have work parties at church and the pastor's nowhere to be seen. What kind of church is that? Well, it's the kind of church where the pastor listens to God. And God says, I don't want you at that work day. Okay, I won't go. And then there's times when he says, I want you to spend 3 weeks putting a stupid ceiling tile thing in. And I'll be like, okay, I'll go do that. Whatever. But you see, the idea, like we struggle with such, I could get so hung up on this. We struggle with such basic things. Christ came to set you free. Everything he did was to set you free. You scour the earth to look for ways that you can lock yourself back up. Mind-blowing. You've got to experience the freedom to understand what it means to suffer for Christ. All right, so let's get a little further down the road, because we're not going to make it to where I wanted to make it to, because I can't shut up. So chapter 3, right? We're finally out of chapter 2. Chapter 3 says, therefore. So we know therefore is a reflection on everything we've done in the past 2 weeks. Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above. Okay. So this again goes back to belief, and belief only comes from doing. seeing only comes from believing, and believing only comes from doing, right? You can't actually believe until you do something